Welcome to Success Authority's Conversation Street with Leadership Authority Peter Beaumont and with Business Culture Authority Ron Lehman and me, Linda Ruland, Success Authority's founder.
Have you done any research into why there appears to be more stress for leaders now? Or is it just common sense? We kind of know what it is.
It really introduces a lot of uncertainty, lack of a predictability, and lack of a progress. So those are the three big psychological factors when it comes to stress. Lack of a control, lack of a predictability, and lack of a progress. Well, we talk about control, but predictability is very difficult to predict how everything's going to go or what's going to happen down the road. With the recession looming, with the bank failures, with strikes, and the labor shortage, leaders have a hard time to predicting what the demand is going to be, how I'm going to get the right staff, and how, what's the revenue be like. It's a lot more difficult for them to predict what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So there's lack of a predictability. That's a huge, huge psychological stressor. Mm-hmm. And lack of progress. Well, during COVID, the first year of COVID was kind of hard. And the second year, I saw a lot of business, they had the record years. The demand went up and a lot of people had a lot of free money or free cash to spend or spare money to spend. And so their business boomed tremendously. They got record years, record revenues. But now things kind of calmed down last year people with the looming recession, with inflation, people held back their spending. Mm-hmm. So for leaders, boom, they had a high and they had a low. So that's not progress. We call that setback. When you have a big setback like that, that's a huge, huge stressor. There's lack of a progress, lack of a predictability, and lack of control. Mm-hmm. Those are all piling on. They're all piling on to cause more stress for leaders.
That's a great answer. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's really right on. Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you mentioned COVID, and I was just having this conversation with someone in the healthcare business about those first weeks of COVID, where there was none of those things. We didn't have any. We didn't have control. We didn't have predictability. We didn't have progress as individuals. And it was, the talk of a vaccine or understanding what this was just, it was all so amorphous. And we were both talking about all the things that were talked about in those beginning weeks that were, well, we could try this and we could try this and we could try this. But what we both kind of came to is now looking back, the progress was really astonishing, historically speaking. To get a vaccine out to all the number of people it did in the amount of time it took is unprecedented. But when we were in the middle of it, there was no sign of anything. And I think that was probably those first few days and weeks when we didn't know what this was very stressful. But in retrospect, looking back, went, oh, okay, well, that happened, but it got taken care of. So here we are. And as the perspective shifts, I think for me, it's important to remember what those early days were like, because, just today I was at the doctor's and even in the hospital, there's people without masks, and we've just kind of got into this place where it's all taken care of now, until you hear that someone got COVID. Yeah. And then my stress level goes up, and right away it's like, oh my God, it's not gone. So you describe that up and down. It's the same thing with an individual. As I feel my stress goes up around COVID, and then it goes back down, and then it goes up. But it's those three things that you just mentioned that just personally, I experienced that.
Mm-hmm. Realistically, though, I mean, when we're in status of change, like you mentioned, Ron, with COVID, and there is the need in the calling to innovate, to do things differently. It's very hard, obviously, to do any predictive planning. So it seems to me that that's just part of what life looks like today and going forward. Is it not that we can or should control whether or not we can predict, or is it that we need to look at how we perceive some of these conditions?
I certainly think there's that, first understanding what you can control and what you can't, and then focusing on those things you can. And then in terms of predictability, I think, when you talk about innovation is almost by nature unpredictable.
Yeah.
So you're sort of embracing the unpredictability. And, one of the things, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think one response that leaders sometimes make is to not do anything. It's like, let's wait and see. And then you have others who say, let's, ready, shoot, aim. Let's try stuff. Okay, that didn't work. And, it's fail quickly. Let's try things, didn't work. Next thing. Because I think that then gives you a sense of progress, that you're at least learning and trying things. And it's frustrating when everyone just, let's have another meeting and talk about it, or another discussion of the problem, as opposed to let's try some things. And I think those fast movers, or those leaders that are willing to take some chances and risks, I think they get through it more quickly. But I have no empirical evidence about that.
So I just, while you were talking, Ron, really just made me think. We've talked about the lack of three things: predictability, control, and progress for leaders, which cause stress. I'm wondering what the factors are for employees. Control seems to be one of those. But maybe indecision is one that Ron just brought up. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that, Terry? Is it the same?
It's pretty much the same. When leaders don't really have clear idea of what's going to happen, they lack predictability, and they cannot communicate clearly to their employees or followers. And that murky communication can be a stressor for the employees because they don't know what's going to happen. There's a lack of predictability for them as well, a lack of progress. Well, if the company is doing well last year and it's not doing well now, and there's a setback for the company, and then for the employees, do I still have my job 6 months from now? So there's lack of predictability and lack of progress. I don't know whether I should send out my resume or not. So these factors affect both the leaders and the employees as well.
And I think too,
we're kind of just kind of like a non-discriminative.
Yeah. And and the predictability part, just with what I was saying earlier about, let's say that the leader adopts an innovation and says, okay, well, we're going to try a lot of things and see what works. That might be perceived as unpredictability by the employees. It's like, well, let's just pick one way and go. So that has to be framed. As you mentioned, you got to frame that and say, it's going to be predictably unpredictable for a while. And but it's predictable. We're going to try things and keep and find something that works for us. So again, I think in so many leadership messages, it's as much about the framing and understanding the things that you've talked about. Is this is how humans take on board messages, and you have to really think about the perceptions. How could this be taken, and really framing it, and also just being honest about it. I think sometimes leaders kind of tend to try and make it, let's not scare everybody. But we're humans. We're going to be scared. We can get scared all by ourselves. And sometimes even bad news, if you get it, it's easier to deal with than something that you think, well, I think this is really bad, but the leaders are saying, no, don't worry about anything, And so again, this whole framing and communication, everything seems to always come back to that, is that the result of all communication is misunderstanding. So we have to just acknowledge that. And that's, I know that's part of the things you do too, Terry, is just how humans take on board information and make decisions, which I think is fascinating. We are fascinating beings.
So just to dovetail on Ron's point, sometimes when leaders don't really know what's going to happen, say 6 months from now, but at least you have a pretty good idea what's going to happen a month from now. At least communicate that to your employees. Even give people that short-term predictability is better than not giving them predictability at all. So just like about reframing, you cannot do this. No one can predict what's going to happen, say 6 months from now, whether more banks will fail or whether the debt ceiling is going to cause some big default, some really chaos. No one can predict that, but at least say, okay, a month from now, the job is secure. We're going to have steady flow of revenues and we're going to be fine. So you kind of narrow down the framework and narrow down the perspective, and that can give the employees a sense of predictability.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about a leader I worked with once, and he felt that he had to always communicate that he was certain, he was confident, and he had the answers. And even when he didn't, and he felt like he could never say, I don't know, or I'm not sure. He had to be always, confident whenever he was speaking to the company or speaking to anyone. But privately, he had lots of doubts. And as we're talking, I just think that was a huge source of stress for him, that he had to put on this act almost. And was afraid of what will people, what will they'll get scared, or what if there isn't this strong, confident person. But eventually he started being more authentic, and just the opposite happened. People leaned into it and said, we'll support you, we'll help you. And just by saying, I'm not sure, I need answers from you all. Because he realized that he had sort of taught his employees to wait for him to come up with the answer. And so they didn't have to think or be creative or whatever it was. And that was a huge shift for him. But I just remember him being very stressed about, kind of having to get up for conversations and meetings and things. And I don't think he did much better thinking when he wasn't so stressed. So ironically, he was so concerned about the message he was going to send, and then he didn't have the answers. When he reduced that stress, he suddenly had more answers. So it was interesting. I spent a year with him just to watch his kind of transition over that. And I would ask everybody here, is that an experience that you run into with leaders, that they feel they have to be perfect, or the strong man or strong woman theory of leadership?
Oh yeah, and I've written about it actually in articles, in pieces of articles, because that's what I call self-induced stress, because suddenly you're a leader and therefore you have to have all the answers. That's what I think I'd like to say that's old style leadership, Ron, and that's what we see. But unfortunately, it's still current, because a lot of the people who think like that are still in those jobs as leaders. But I do see that changing. I do see younger leaders being much more embracing and facilitating more than they're leading, but they're facilitators. They facilitate ideas around a table rather than saying, now this is what we've got to do because I'm a leader, therefore I will lead, rather than, hey, what's everybody think about this? So here's the problem. I don't have the solution. I think the combination of that solutions around this table. What does everybody think? I'll make the decision, because that is a leader. Somebody has to make it. It's not a democracy. But what does everybody feel about it? And by the way, when we make the decision, I want your commitment that even if you don't agree with that decision, you're still going to follow it. That's leadership. That's leadership. It's
even that sort of, heroic leader thing is coming from history. I read a book that basically said, that Alexander the Great. I mean, that's a pretty good leadership title right there. The Great. But they had this whole sense that he ran, did all these amazing things. But it wasn't quite that way. As always, as they looked into it, he had the ability to get the people around him to be creative and do different things. And he made the decisions, but he always had input from, his father and others. So even that, hallmark of one person who created an amazing empire. No, he had a lot of help. And the other thing it triggered was the famous quote from Alfred Sloan of General Motors. He was having a meeting, and everybody was in agreement about something. And he said at the end, well, I suggest that we end this meeting, and because we're all in agreement, I think we ought to go away and think about this and do more research until we can come back and we have some disagreement. Which I thought was really an interesting leadership skill to say, yeah, we're all in agreement. And he might have been in agreement too, but he said it's too much agreement. We need to look at this deeper.
It's fascinating that, because healthy conflict is what's needed to surface alternative ideas. Yeah. And I think leaders too often jump to what you just described, which is everybody agrees, so I must be right. I must be right. So, and I think that leads to poor decision making. I really do, because you haven't mined all the alternatives.
And we circle back to trust. I need to trust that it's okay for me to speak up.
Yeah.
Because if everybody thinks one thing, it's 12 Angry Men. If you've got that one juror who holds out, that's a courageous decision to be, the skunk at the picnic who is the only one who always says, I don't agree with any of this. And then how people respond to that, especially the leader. It's, this just, as you said, Terry, it's just this spiral, and it's constant. You get constant reinforcement on things all day long. And so bring everybody back into the office and let's watch the fun. It should be fascinating because, it's the human condition. I think the leader is wise I think that's why your messages are always so powerful, Terry, because every leader needs to understand that don't worry about the robots. They'll be fine. It's the humans and how we all show up.
Right.
If you can recognize and manage that, that's a large percentage of the issues that you're having go away, or start to go away anyway.
Ron, you really made a good point about some leaders. They pretend that they have all the answers. They can predict the future. They have the right answer. They have the right strategies, but pretending that you're not stressed while you're under stress, you're actually just creating you just have to create a stressor for yourself. Pretending, suppressing your natural emotions, you're stressed out, and then I have to pretend that I'm not stressed, and you get yourself a huge stressor there. So it's not, and then when we're under stress, the dangerous thing about stress is it actually makes you make bad decisions. And your decision-making ability got impaired. And that's why when leaders get stressed out, they start making dumb decisions, and dumb decisions lead to bad outcomes. And bad outcomes come back to haunt them, cause more stress. Another big vicious circle.
Yeah. And then all your worst fears come true.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And as you alluded to, and this is all in addition to the health issues that come from stress, the physical and issues that come from it. And it's pretty scary reading when you look at the list of things that, starting with suppressing your immune system, which, I think in the last few years, we've all become frighteningly aware of how important that is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of good reasons to not be stressed. And if only it were that easy.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversation Street. For more information or to submit a question, email Success Authorities at inquire@successauthorities.com.